Hello, folks. Dr. Hoffman, do you hear me?
I do, yep.
Okay. Hello, folks. Thanks for being here today and welcome to our online seminar entitled The Role of Petroleum Engineering in the Energy Transition. I am honored to present you Dr. Todd Hoffman. Dr. Hoffman is a professor and department head for the Petroleum Engineering Department at Montana Tech. He teaches classes on reservoir simulation, EUR, and unconventional reservoirs. Dr. Hoffman was also a professor at Colorado School of Mines, where he taught courses on geostatics, fluid properties, and reservoir engineering. Prior to that, he was a reservoir engineering consultant to the oil and gas industry, specializing in flow modeling and fractured reservoir. He has over 20 years of combined experience in academia and industry. He has worked on reservoir models for more than 30 fields on 6 continents and has published over 50 technical papers. His research involves improved recovery for conventional and unconventional oil reservoir, fracture reservoir modeling, and history matching. In 2019-20, Dr. Hoffman was an SBE distinguished lecturer presenting on EOR in unconventional reservoir. Dr. Hoffman received his bachelor degree in petroleum engineering from Montana Tech and master degree, PhD degree in petroleum engineering from Stanford University. So Dr. Hoffman has an extensive experience in the oil industry, and we are so lucky to have him here today in this seminar. He was also my committee member in my PhD study 2016-2018 in Missouri University of Science and Technology. So, Dr. Hoffman, the mic is yours. Go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Man, I really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for inviting me here, Dia, Dr. Khalif, to give this presentation. I want to thank everybody who's attending. It's an exciting area, topic for me to talk about. I wish I could be there in person. Maybe in the future, that's something I can do. But in the meantime, I really appreciate the technology that we have that allows me to, I don't know, someone needs to mute their mic.
No, go ahead, Dr. Hoffman.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the first slide, I guess, is just a quick disclaimer. So I'm going to talk about the role of petroleum engineering in the, energy transition, but it's coming from my perspective. It's my views based on my past experience. As I said, I have 3 degrees in petroleum engineering, my bachelor's here at Montana Tech, my master's and PhD at Stanford. I'm a department head of petroleum engineering, I'm a professor of petroleum engineering. And I grew up on a cattle ranch in the region. And so all of that kind of feeds into my idea about kind of what the future holds. So, just, take it for a grain of salt. Hopefully my presentation will be about 30 minutes, and that'll leave us, 15, 20 minutes at the end for questions, discussion. I'd like to hear what you guys think about it, and just have kind of a larger discussion about the role of petroleum engineering in the future. So first, I just want to start off about, how much energy has improved the quality of life of humans kind of over the last 150, 200 years. prior to 1850s, all of our energy that was being expended was either human energy or animal energy, right? We didn't have anything else. Okay, there may have been some windmills here or there, or some water wheels to grind some grain, but the vast majority of the energy that was used was beast and human. And the quality of life then was very different. Somewhere between 80 and 90% of the population basically spent their time growing food. So, that takes a long hours, a lot of time to do that. And there's not a lot of free time to explore other areas and to improve the quality of life. So today, right, we have tractors that do this plowing, and we have all sorts of machinery in all sorts of areas that are doing that work. And that's all powered by, oil and natural gas and coal. I'm lumping coal in here as well. Coal is a big part of the energy transformation, the industrial revolution that happened, back in the middle 1800s. And what that allows us more time to explore other areas. So today in the United States, there's only 2% of the population that works in agriculture, growing food, right? The other 90% are allowed to do other things. And so that gives them time to invent new ideas and come up with better ways to do things. So I show this tractor in this picture here, and you may or may not notice, but there's no person sitting there, right? That tractor is basically running without any human, right? It's running on AI, artificial intelligence, to basically drive that tractor through the field. So we've gotten so far, we've improved things so much, right, that we don't even need the human. We don't need the horses to do the plow. We don't need the human either, right? It can all just run automatically. And so I just wanted to start with saying, like, yeah, energy has really made a big difference in our lives, and we should be proud of all the things that it did. That being said, it's not shared equally. Some parts of the world have had higher quality of life. I believe everybody's quality of life has risen, but some parts have risen more. And this is just a picture of the world that kind of shows life expectancy. And you can see sub-Saharan Africa is really the outlier, right? Other parts have a pretty high. And this is just one measure of kind of quality of life expectancy, but there's other measures as well. And so this is actually a plot that I put together that shows life expectancy as a function of the amount of energy that's used. So this is per country, and these red countries are those sub-Saharan African countries. You can see they're not using much energy, and the quality of life expectancy is low. And again, you could, on life expectancy, you could have, nutrition rates, you could have childhood disease, you could have, there's any number of measures of quality of life. But basically, they all show the same thing. As you increase your energy usage, the quality of life goes up. And this scale, I'm just going to point out, you all see this, but this scale on the x-axis is a log scale. So these countries over here are using 100 times more energy than these countries down here, right? So that's a significant, difference. And the goal, I think, of our energy future is to get these lower quality locations, lower life expectancy, lower energy usage up into the higher regions, so that they can have a higher quality of life, have longer lives, less time, less hours spent doing physical labor, all the things that we recognize as higher quality of life. We'd like to see that. And so that's the goal, I think, of our future energy use. Basically bring the poor countries up to the standards of energy of the wealthy countries. And this just, kind of this picture comes from a presentation from Chris Wright. So I want to call out Chris Wright. He has a real passion for energy poverty and reducing energy poverty. He has a lot of great talks. If you got on YouTube, you can find his stuff. So if you want kind of more information in this area, he does a much better job presenting it than I do. So I just want to call out his, but what he shows here is just basically kind of in 3 areas: drinking water, transportation, and cooking, how as you increase the energy usage, you increase the quality of life. But I wanted to, and I just noticed this also, even here in this kind of the lowest quality for drinking water, they still have a plastic bucket to haul the water. So 200 years ago, they would have been using, weaved mats or clay pots to try to carry this water. But that bucket is possible because of hydrocarbons. So even the hydrocarbons goes clear down to the lowest levels of energy usage. So that's, that's the goal. We need to increase that. So as the role of petroleum engineers is to make sure that the quality of life of people all over the world is increasing. So I'm going to pivot a little bit now and talk about kind of where we are in our energy usage and where we're headed in our energy usage. So this is a snapshot. This is the world or the global energy consumption by type. And you can see that natural gas, oil, and coal even today make up the vast majority. About 85% of the world's energy comes from these three sources. Traditional biomass, that's burning wood basically, is a big portion. And then all the wind, solar, nuclear makes up a small percentage, maybe 10% of that, or under 10%. And so, that's where we are. That's where we are today. As we project forward, I'm going to show two different projections. One from the EIA, which is the Energy Information Administration, which is based in the United States. Here in 2020, or this is when this projection came out, we were at that 80% mark basically for the hydrocarbons. But if they project out for 30 years, out to 2050, we still see that coal, natural gas, and oil basically make up a significant share. Now, the renewable portion has grown tremendously, and that's the projections of all, really all the people that are projecting stuff, is that wind, solar, geothermal, maybe even hydro are going to grow significantly. But our energy usage, our energy needs, as we move those energy poverty countries into the energy wealthy countries, we're going to need to grow our energy pie. Everything's need to increase. So the projections are that basically oil and gas and coal is going to continue to provide maybe 70 to 75% of the energy by 2050. And this is, I get this slide's a little messy. This is a same information. It's a different agency, the International Energy Agency, which is based out of Europe. And you can see, again, where we are today. This is in 2021 when they published this. And this is historical data. You can see renewables are taking a huge increase. But oil, which is the red line, stays high. Natural gas actually is projected to grow significantly. So less carbon intensive hydrocarbon, cleaner burning, more efficient. So I think the goal is to really focus on natural gas increases, but even oil, right? It's not going away. Coal is decreasing, and again, it's the highest carbon intensity of energy source. So you can see that this projection is showing that our carbon intensity is decreasing over the next 30 years, but it's not going away. So, that the picture that I'm trying to say is that, oil and gas is going to be around, for the next 30 years. If you're graduating from college now, your whole career can be in oil and gas, and there'll be plenty of jobs, plenty of opportunities. Same story that I'm telling my high school students today that are looking to go into the oil and gas industry, right? It's going to be around for your career. It's going to be around for your kids' career. It's going to be around for your grandkids' career. I mean, it's going to be around for a long time because we need that energy that comes from that. Now, other areas, renewables also are growing. If you want to go into solar, wind areas, that's an exciting area to go into. Great, you can do that. But you can have a long career in oil and gas as well. And that's one of the stories. The other story, and I just have this one slide about it because often you hear, well, we're going to run out of oil and gas. And that was the story when I was a kid. Actually, my mentor and one of my early bosses here at Montana Tech, he tells a story like when he was coming into the oil and gas industry, he was going to college, he gets a petroleum engineering degree in 1969. And they told him, his friends, other people said, why are you going to oil and gas? Like, we're going to be running out of oil and gas in the next 10 years. It's a dead end area. And, but he, pursued that. He went into it, had a big, long career. I had the same story. I came to college in 1995. Same story. Why would you go into oil and gas? We're running out of oil and gas. It's not going to be around. And, that was 20 some years later, 26 years later, I was getting the same story. Now we come forward to today, 2023. These high school students are getting told the same story. Why would you go into oil and gas? It's not going to be there for your careers. And this slide just shows that really the conventional oil and gas that we've been producing from the easy areas, we found most of those fields. Now there's still some to be discovered. Exxon and Hess in Guyana, kind of the North Shore of South America, found some huge fields, conventional. So those still places to find those. But what we've really discovered in the last 20 years, so I graduated my undergraduate degree in 1999, went to work in the industry, went to work for Anadarko in Houston, ended up in California going to grad school at Stanford. And then I came back, I don't want to tell the whole story, but I ended up coming back to Montana Tech in 2005 as a professor. And in Montana, the world had changed. And the world had changed because of this middle part of this resource pyramid, this tight oil and gas, tight sands, unconventional, what I call unconventional reservoirs. They're huge volumes, but it requires more technology to produce them. So we, figured out, actually it started here in Montana, if you drill long horizontal wells and hydraulically fracture those wells, you can produce from these source rocks, which we knew had existed since the beginning of our oil production 150 years ago, but we never could figure out how to produce them. But the volumes, there's 100 times more oil in these unconventional reservoirs, these source rocks, than there are in the conventional reservoirs. And really, we've only developed unconventional reservoirs in North America, Canada and the US, maybe a little bit in Argentina, and maybe a little bit in Russia. But for the most part, all the places that have conventional oil still have these unconventional reservoirs that can be exploited. And so there's huge volumes of oil there. And then past that, there's oil shale, which are basically the oil is bound up in the rock, and there's gas hydrates, which basically the natural gas is bound up with water in a solid state. The volume of those are kind of 100 times bigger than our unconventional reservoirs. So there's going to be hydrocarbons to produce for, hundreds of years. So I just want to add that in as like, not only are our projections saying we're going to use hydrocarbons, but we're not running out of hydrocarbons anytime soon. We may need to increase the technology to be able to produce those. That's what we had to do as we went from conventional to unconventional. And what we have to do is we go from unconventional to these gas hydrates, oil shales. But, that's what we do. That's what humans do, is we invent new ways to produce things. So I kind of painted a rosy picture of oil and gas, right? But it's not so, everything's not so rosy, right? And if you talk to, other parts of the world, the non-oil and gas people, they think, oh, oil and gas is this horrible thing because of climate change. So I don't want to ignore climate change and global warming. I think that's a major issue. It's a major problem, and we need to address it. And so I'm going to do a couple quick slides just to kind of describe the problem. So first off, just what is greenhouse effect? So I live here in Montana. It's actually freezing outside, it's below freezing. I'm comfortable. I live in my house. I have natural gas to heat my home. So again, that's part of the story of the quality of life that's been improved because of that. But in these northern areas, our growing season is very short. So one of the things we can do to extend that is we build these greenhouses, which are basically made out of glass. The sun rays that come in have a certain wavelength. It penetrates through the glass. It hits the material inside the plants, and then it radiates back, but the radiation back is a longer wave, and so it can't get through the glass, and it gets trapped in there. So these greenhouses are much warmer than the outside air. And even if you don't live in a cool climate where I do, where you have these greenhouses, if you've ever gotten into a car in the summer when the sun is beat on it. It's the same thing. The car is very hot inside, much hotter than the outside, because solar waves came in through the car, through the glass, but couldn't get back out and got trapped in there. So that's a greenhouse effect. How is that impacting oil and the climate change? Well, carbon dioxide molecules and methane molecules and water molecules basically do the same thing. They're like the glass. They reflect back the solar energy that's coming out. The solar energy can pass through them fine, but when it's reflecting back, it hits those molecules and then reflects it back. It has kind of a heating effect for the whole Earth. Most of the gases in the atmosphere, which are nitrogen, oxygen, argon, they don't reflect it. They allow the radiation to pass. So it's only these, a few of these molecules, which make up a small percentage of the atmosphere, but it's enough that it can change the temperature. And over the last 100 years, we started burning fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas. The amount of CO2 in the atmosphere has increased. It was around 300 parts per million, or 0.03%, and it's grown up over 400. So it's increased significantly, over this time. And if you look at the temperature, so I'm showing on the right side, the temperature, average temperature by a few different organizations. From the first maybe 100 years, you didn't see much increase, but over the last 50 to 75 years, you see a significant increase in the global average temperature. So we see the CO2 increasing, we see the temperature increasing. We understand how greenhouse effect works. This all indicates that there's global warming. Right? It's caused by the burning hydrocarbons and releasing more CO2 into the atmosphere. So that's a problem. I think one of the main, so some people say, well, just stop using hydrocarbons, right? And that's the solution. But if you think back to the beginning of my presentation, right, the idea is that we're trying to increase the quality of life of humans. And we really need low-cost, reliable energy sources to do that. And hydrocarbons are part of that. So what are some other solutions? Well, I think one of the best solutions is to try to grab that carbon dioxide and put it back in the ground. And, I actually don't have a slide on this, but also there's a lot of methane emissions happening associated with oil and gas production. We need to make sure we stop those. There's at the oil tanks, there's sometimes a little latch on the top where it opens and methane vents out to the atmosphere. In the U.S., most states have stopped that. They require us to put a vapor recovery unit on there. And so there's some things like that we can do. Landfills, like, dump waste sites, they produce methane. So there's, again, new regulations to make sure to try to extract that methane back out so it's not just going into the atmosphere. So that's one area that we can work on. Again, the role of petroleum engineering is to try to reduce those emissions. For the carbon sequestration, it's to take the carbon and basically put it back in the ground, the CO2. And you can put it into aquifers, you can put it into old oil and gas reservoirs. You can capture it from power plants. So if there's a natural gas-fired power plant, you can capture that CO2 and put it back in there. And so I want to talk about kind of two projects that are happening in the U.S. that are related to that. So the first one is, so here's Montana. This is where I'm at. Here's the United States. We're kind of in the northern part. Now over here on the far east side of the state, there's two major projects going on by a company called Denbury and now they're taking a CO2 from down in Wyoming. There's a plant down there that's producing a lot of CO2. They've captured it, they put it in the pipeline. They've actually done a number of CO2 floods in Wyoming to try to increase the oil production, kind of historically through the 90s, early 2000s. But over the last 7-8 years, maybe 10 years even now, they are really not only trying to increase the oil production, but to store the CO2 in the ground. So the first project they did was called Bell Creek. And this is a huge field, maybe close to 1 billion barrels of oil originally in place. And so they've been, injecting CO2, producing oil, but that oil that they're producing is, even after you burn it, the amount of CO2 that it's going to release is less than the amount of CO2 that they put into this reservoir. So they're calling it blue oil or carbon negative oil. So that oil that they've been producing basically is less carbon intensive than in really any other oil. It's actually carbon negative, right? And so this company, Denbury, has extended their pipeline just in the last, I guess, 2 or 3 years up to the Cedar Creek anticline, which is a much larger oil field. It's a series of oil fields in Montana, right here on the eastern side. And about 1.5 years ago, they started basically injecting CO2 into these fields. So they're doing a additional CO2 flood, but it's also carbon negative oil. There'll be more carbon stored in that reservoir at the end of the life than the oil that burned, or the carbon that was released from the oil and gas that was burned from that. So this is just a project here in Montana. Denbury has a similar network down here in Mississippi, Louisiana, and kind of the Gulf Coast of Texas, where they're doing the same thing. They're capturing carbon dioxide, injecting into the ground, producing additional oil, and leaving more carbon in the ground than they produce. Exxon actually recently bought Denbury. I'm not sure if it's even finalized yet, but and Exxon have an even much larger network of CO2 sources and pipelines. So the idea, I imagine, is that that's going to be expanded to other parts of the world. So here's a great example of, producing more oil and storing the carbon. And there's also, I guess I should say one more thing. Denbury has stored some carbon in non-hydrocarbon reservoirs in North Dakota, just over the border here. They have some access to some aquifers where they've been injecting CO2 just as a straight storage. So that's in addition to what they're storing in these other fields too. So a lot of opportunity to store, carbon, take it out of the atmosphere and put it in the ground. The other project I want to talk about is one from Oxy, where they're, we've already, as I showed, we went from 300 parts per million to 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. That's there already. So the only way to reduce that again is to actually pull it back out of the atmosphere. And so Oxy has proposed kind of a direct air capture, which basically just takes air, pulls the CO2 out, injects it. Now, Oxy has a bunch of fields in the western part of Texas. So some of this CO2 could be going to their EOR projects in conventional reservoirs, and it could also just be going into aquifers, basically, to store it. And their goal in their latest publications show that they'd like to have 3 of these facilities online by 2025. And there is one today in Iceland where they're pulling just kind of it's a smaller one, but it's just to show, proof of concept that you can actually capture CO2 out of the atmosphere. So again, these projects I talked about, these are designed by petroleum engineers. They're, petroleum engineering funded by petroleum companies, and they're basically reducing the amount of carbon that's going out into the atmosphere. So it's part of the solution. It's not the only solution to climate change, but again, as a petroleum engineer, you need to drill wells, you design production facilities, and you understand fluid flow and porous media. So the same part, the carbon capture and storage, requires the same skills that the petroleum engineer is learning today, and they can use those skills to basically help solve this climate change problem. And then again, this is a bit of an aside, but all energy sources have waste. So as we're transitioning from oil, gas, and coal to other energy sources, we need to think about what the waste is and how we're going to deal with that. So, our waste is mostly CO2, or the waste that causes a problem. And so again, we're trying to come up with ways to deal with that. Wind and solar and hydro, mostly it's physical things. It's wind blades, it's solar panels. And so we need to find a way to recycle those so that they're being, they can be reused or, dealt with, so that we're not, having the same, requires large mines to mine this stuff. So we'd like to reuse some of that material so we don't have to continue to have these large mines in place to do that. I'm a big fan of nuclear power. But it has a waste problem also. It's radioactive waste that has to be stored somewhere. And it's a long-term storage that has to be prevented from leaking out, basically. So, again, I think there's some opportunity to expand nuclear energy into other parts of the locations, maybe some smaller module reactors. There's some people in Oregon and Washington working on that today that I think has a lot of potential. And then finally, geothermal. Geothermal is, the problem with geothermal for a long time was that you had to find a place that had hot rocks and high permeability so that you could flow these large volumes and a large volume of water you needed. There was about 15 years ago, I worked on a couple of geothermal projects. Again, mostly the same skills that I used as a petroleum engineer, but the volumes were very different. We worked on a well, it was producing, 10, 12,000 barrels a day, and that was a dry hole because they needed like 30 to 50,000 barrels a day per well just to make these wells economic. So, in the US where we're making 100 barrels a day of oil out of a well, we'd be happy to have a 10,000 barrel a day well, but in geothermal, it doesn't work. The good news is there's been some, again, technology increase, mainly by petroleum engineers all we need to do is find hot places, hot rocks. We can create the permeability by drilling long horizontal wells and hydraulically fracturing them, similar to what we do in unconventional reservoirs. And then we inject water into some wells and produce the hot water from other wells. So again, that technology is in its really early stages. There's a few test cases that are happening, but I think there's a lot of potential in geothermal as well for other future energy sources. So again, I'm kind of copying some work of other people. This is the grand challenge laid out to the oil and gas industry by a guy named Scott Tinker. He's a professor at University of Texas. And the grand challenge, or sometimes you hear it called the dual mandate, but it's the same idea. We need to be able to provide reliable, low-cost energy to everyone, while at the same time reducing the impacts of global warming. So those are two big challenges. And I challenged my students in Montana. I challenged students, across the world that, this is going to be the grand challenge of your generation. We need to continue to increase the energy usage to lift these people, to improve the quality of life for everyone. But we can't destroy the quality of life of some people because global warming is causing these additional problems. So we need to balance those two, or we really need to do both of them. And again, if you would like, Scott Tinker does a much better job explaining it than I do. So you can go out on the Google machine and Google Scott Tinker and watch some of his talks. He has some great TED Talks that are really good, and I recommend doing that if you have an opportunity to. So what does this mean for petroleum engineering? That was my title, right? The role of petroleum engineering in the transition. So I think the roles of future petroleum engineers I still think number one is to be producing hydrocarbons. I really do, but that's tied in with number two, which is carbon capture and underground storage, right? If we're going to be producing hydrocarbons and burning them, we need to be able to take that carbon dioxide and do something with it. And the something with it, I think, really is either EOR, enhanced oil recovery, or just pure storage. I didn't talk about this, but I've also been working on a brine mining project where we're basically there's not even oil wells around. It's just water that has lots of lithium in it. And I've been doing reservoir engineering work for them. How do you place wells? Where do you inject water? How much lithium are you going to produce? All these kind of traditional oil and gas things that we do. How much oil is there? How much are we going to produce? Where should we put wells? We can do these also with our same skill set for mining other minerals. Geothermal we talked about. There's other opportunities, maybe helium. Hydrogen, people talk about hydrogen storage. I'm not as optimistic about hydrogen, but that may be an option. And I guess the point is the fundamental skills that I'm teaching my students as petroleum engineers are still going to be needed. In any of these areas, we need to be able to drill wells. We need to be able to design production equipment, design facilities, and we need understand the reservoir, understand fluid flow and porous media, right? So these are all the basic fundamental skills you should be learning as petroleum engineers. I'm teaching us as a petroleum engineering faculty. I still think, again, you know, in the next 50, 100 years, those skills are still going to be needed, and the petroleum engineering degree is still going to be important. I just threw in a slide a little bit about what we're doing at Montana Tech in this transition. And so the first thing we did, and this was, I guess, 4 or 5 years ago now, we added data science analytics into our curriculum. We added some courses, we changed some courses so that when students graduate, they're comfortable with some programming softwares like Python, some better data visualization software like Power BI or Tableau. And then we instituted that in a sophomore level, and then we put a bunch of material in the junior and senior level to basically reinforce those skills. Because we think that students of the future are going to have to understand data analytics much better than I did when I graduated in 1999. Also, we've added sustainability into our curriculum. Both of these came from some information from our alumni. We have a board of alumni, and that was the feedback that, you know, here's some things we'd like to see your students graduating with. And the sustainability piece, again, these are skills a petroleum engineer should have when they graduate. Understand about the emissions, you know, how much CO2 are we generating from different projects? Where can we find places where methane is escaping into the atmosphere and capture that? That's a value product. We can sell that. In addition, it's a major global warming molecule, so we'd like to do that. And then kind of the third thing is just talk about, when we think about producing a barrel of oil, we want to produce a barrel of oil that has the lowest carbon intensity. So we talked about the Denbury projects where it's carbon negative, but even if you can reduce the amount of energy it took to produce that barrel of oil, the amount of CO2 that you're releasing to produce that barrel of oil, that's good. And so you should be thinking about that as petroleum engineers. So that's all things we added into our curriculum to try to improve that. But also, we're doubling down at Montana Tech. We're focusing on the fundamentals, drilling, production, and reservoir. So conclusions, petroleum products have increased the quality of life for billions of people, and it will continue to do so. Again, these are, my perspective. Hydrocarbon production usage, I think, will stay flat or slightly increase over the next 30 to 50 years. I do acknowledge that global warming, climate change is a problem, and it needs to be addressed. But I do think petroleum engineers have some of the skills to help solve that problem, or help at least work on that problem. And so I want to make sure that they're able to and willing to do that. And other areas, like we talked about geothermal, brine mining, or other areas that petroleum engineers will continue or work on more and continue to work on. And then I put the very fifth one. I haven't talked about this yet, but what are we transitioning to, right? This is a transition. What do you think we're and so this is my thoughts, and this is, again, it's based on a lot of things, but I believe sometime in the next 100 plus years, we'll transition to a fully solar energy economy. Why do I think that? Well, almost all of our energy sources today are solar. Like even our coal, that was, sun made our plants grow, die. And, so it's abundant. But the problem is we're really inefficient at capturing it. And so I'd like to tell the story. It was about 1.5 years ago, I met a student at Montana Tech, and he was a master's student. He was planning to start his PhD, so he started it this fall. And I haven't talked to him since then. I need to follow up with him. But his idea for his PhD project was to work on spray-on solar. And we have a great nanotechnology group researcher in our mechanical engineering program at Montana Tech. It's fantastic. And so he's working in that group. And so his idea would be to develop a material that you could spray on, plug it in, and you have basically a solar energy collection. Now, this is an idea of a PhD student, right? Or not even a PhD student, he was a master's student at the time. And then for him to develop that and become commercial, that's a long-term process, right? I'm not saying that is happening. But those are the ideas that are out there that people are working on. So at some point, there'll be solar in everything. Solar in our buildings, solar collection in our roads, our sidewalks, even in our clothes. We'll just be always collecting solar energy. And at that point, probably we won't need as much oil and gas, or we might not need any. But that transition takes a long time. And I'm guessing optimistically that's 100 years away. Probably more realistically 150 to 200 years away, right, before you can fully transition away. So that's the time scale I see. And then again, that's the role that I see of petroleum engineering in the energy transition. So with that, hopefully you guys have been thinking about some questions or thoughts or ideas that you want to talk about.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Hoffman, for this outstanding presentation. We really enjoy it. As well, you are very wonderful speaker. That's why SBE choose you to be the distinguished lecturer around the globe. So we are proud of that. And you very well summarized the statement that said we are not only the main reason behind the global warming and climate change, but we need to be part of the solution. Let me see if anyone has any questions. Just raise your hand or open your mic and ask. Okay, Dr. Fadel Serhan, go ahead. Dr. Fadel, do you hear me? Dr. Fadel Serhan, do you hear me? Okay, go ahead, Dr.
Hello.
Hello, go ahead. We hear you.
First, thank you, Prof. Todd and Dr. Dia, as well as Sub-Center, for this opportunity to attend this valuable presentation. My question to Prof. Todd, what do you think about the future of unconventional reservoirs, i.e. shale reservoir from source rock? Especially in the Middle East, we still in the conventional, produced from conventional reservoir.
Okay,
yeah.
Go ahead.
So I'm very optimistic. Most of my career has been working on unconventional reservoirs. Yes. Actually, enhanced oil recovery in unconventional is a kind of a passion of mine, I would say. And so in the United States and Canada, the development, there's still, I don't know, tens of years of development of primary production from conventional reservoirs. Thousands of wells, tens of thousands of wells can be drilled. As we move to other basins, so in the Middle East, right? I haven't looked at the geology, but understanding how hydrocarbons are formed, I'm confident that there are unconventional reservoirs to be produced. I know ADNOC in UAE has done a little bit of work in that, but nothing really super commercial yet. So I think that will be a future, in the next 30 to 50 years, we're going to need unconventional production from the rest of the world. And as conventional reservoirs tend to deplete. I don't know. I'm optimistic. I think it's something we should be working on.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Khaled. Mr. Nabil, go ahead. Nabil Nasrawi, go ahead. Sir.
Hello, Dr. Todd, and hi, Dr. Dia. Thank you for your lecture. I am very interesting for what did you say. Actually, I didn't get more information because the bad connection, if you hear me. So unfortunately, today we have a conference for Karbala University. So it's very short time to catch you. So my name is Nabil. I have the Master of Sustainable from Strathclyde, UK University, Glasgow, in UK. So my question, when I get my master in sustainable, so the UK have a future vision for climate change. So they're thinking about the wind farm and solar power, and they're looking for exactly for the Scotland government. They're talking about the zero emission. As you know, the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere of in the atmosphere, they needed a huge commercial payment to get zero emission and treated the dioxide in the atmosphere. So do you have any vision about USA for the next future for zero emission to replace the crude oil and the gas, to change for the wind farm, offshore and onshore and solar panel?
Yeah. I mean, we've really grown the renewables in the United States, particularly wind. Even here in Montana, I drive about an hour to work, and every day I see wind turbines moving up the interstate. And so we've grown that a lot. And offshore, I think, is a lot of opportunity. Offshore East Coast, they're talking about, they haven't developed anything yet. So I'm really optimistic that we're going to have a bigger renewable percentage of our production. I think that's, I mean, maybe I didn't make that clear, but I'm really optimistic on oil, on renewables. But our energy needs are increasing so much that we're going to need to continue to produce oil and gas. So if we want to get to a net zero economy, a net zero world, we're going to have to figure out how to get carbon out of the production stream. So either take it off what I'm thinking is that we'll take it off the electricity production plants. So there's in the US and in Europe, I don't know about in the Middle East, but electric vehicles are becoming more and more common. The problem with gas and diesel driven vehicles is that the emissions are all spread out all over the area. But if we move to electric vehicles, the electricity is still probably going to be generated from natural gas, maybe even coal, but there it's generated at one spot, so we can capture it, put it in the ground, and then we can, fuel up our vehicles. And maybe more people will get solar on their rooftops, and there'll be more of that. But it's not something that's going to happen in our lifetime. It's like I'll be dead and gone way before we stop using oil and gas, just because of the transition doesn't happen in 10 years, it doesn't happen in 50 years. It's 100-year transition that's happening.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Hoffman. I just need to follow this question. Actually, as you know, the Paris Agreement that by 2050 we will reach the net zero carbon emission. I think the same or like similar statement by Dr. Daniel Jorgen, as you know him, the prize author. He said that the electron will replace the molecule by 2050. And he also said that I can't guarantee the jobs for the petroleum engineering who starts taking the courses in undergraduate right now until their life retirement. So my question, to which extent that by 2050 we will reach the net zero carbon emission? How much it's reliable in your opinion?
I mean, I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's possible at all. And maybe Daniel Jorgen, has different information than I have, but I think emissions will go down. I think between today, 2023 and 2050, our carbon emissions will be significantly lower than they are today, but they won't be zero. there's just too many energy uses that we need. Maybe by 2100. By 2100, if someone said, yeah, we'll be net zero by 2100, I can probably see that happening. But 2050 is just, it's too difficult to achieve. I mean, you think, 30 years in the future, or what is it, 27 years in the future now? Oh yeah, but I mean, 27 years ago, I remember who I was, right? And so I have the lifetime to like say like, no, in 27 years in the future, things will change, but they're not going to change enough for us to meet that goal. And it's okay to, but on the other hand, I'm okay having that goal. We have a really strong connection with ConocoPhillips, and they have that goal at ConocoPhillips, is that our processes are going to be net zero by 2050. Now, that we're making oil and gas, so someone else is using that oil and gas to power things. They're not saying that will be zero, but their process of like producing oil and gas will be net zero. Basically, there's whatever energy they expend to do that, they'll have captured that, or they've offset it somehow. I don't think that's possible for them either, but I like to have that goal. I like to have some stretch goals. Say like, hey, this is our goal. We get to 2040, we're like, we're not going to make it. Okay, let's say 2075, right? And we can have some goals that push out.
Yes.
But what I don't want is people just to say, well, oil and gas has to go away so we can meet this goal, because that's just, it's causing too much harm, right? We're trying to balance harm and good, right? We got to make sure that we do the most good for the most people. So.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Nabil.
Yeah.
You have any other question?
I have a question.
Okay, good.
Just to introduce myself, I'm a Montana Tech alumni as well, and I've graduated at 2020, and I currently work at KOC, specifically in innovation and technology. And I have two questions to Professor Hoffman. The first one.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah, the first one is, to what extent can carbon capture and storage technologies realistically mitigate the environmental impact of the petroleum industry, and what are the economic and logistical challenges associated with widespread implementation?
Great questions. I don't know how much it can do. I don't know if it can do 100%. You hear things like, oh, it's too energy intensive, it takes too much. But if it's 10%, if it's 50%, right, it can be very beneficial. The barriers right now are the separation technology. So right now, again, we're going to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere. It's 0.04%. So you got to extract that 0.04% and then release the rest of the gas. And so that's a energy intensive process. It takes, compression, and it takes chemicals. And so if we could improve that technology to extract the CO2 out of the atmosphere, or even out of the, when we're burning natural gas, the stream that comes up, okay, it may be more than 0.04%. It may be 10%, 20% carbon dioxide, but the other 70-80% is nitrogen and other gases. So even that, to extract that 10% out, requires some improvements in technology. So that's an area that we could work on as petroleum engineers. Ideally, by 2050, we'd say, yeah, we capture all the CO2 that we're emitting. But again, I don't think that's realistic. But I'm hoping that by 2100, we will have both technology and kind of infrastructure in place to be able to do that. But yeah, that's a good point. It's that even that solution isn't an overnight solution. That takes a long time to do that.
And you've answered my second question, but just in case, let me ask it.
Sure.
Since I work in innovation and technology, in what areas do you perceive a lack of developed technologies or innovations that may be essential for energy transition? And what advancements or solutions are needed in those domains?
Yeah, so I mean, the carbon storage part, I think I've talked about. There are some areas I think we need, but I think on the hydrocarbon production, I still think there's a lot of areas that can be improved, and more efficient oil and gas production. If we can produce the oil and gas with lower carbon intensities. So interestingly, the shale oils that we produce in the U.S. today are really low carbon intensity compared to what we do in other places. The stuff that the Exxon's bringing on in Guyana is supposed to be really low carbon intensity. So I think that is some areas that you could work on, is just improving the efficiency of our hydrocarbon production so that we, we're producing less CO2 to make that barrel of oil.
Thank you, Professor Hoffman. Yeah, it does. Thank you, Professor Hoffman. It has been a very interesting presentation.
Good to hear from you again.
Okay, Hussein, do you have a question? Hussein Muhammad?
Question. You said that the world will need the petroleum and gas for the next 30 or 15 years. Nowadays, we see that there's electric cars, electric factors, and even electric jet and electric tank they want. So the electricity that came from the sun and the wind. So how the petroleum will be needed for the next 30 or 50?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a great point. And maybe, again, this is my thought. I may be wrong, but the solar and wind is just not enough to produce enough electricity to fund to supply energy for all the things that we need. Like in the U.S., we've been developing solar and wind a lot. I mean, there's been a lot of development, and we're still only 2% of our energy use in the U.S. is solar and wind. And so it takes a long time for that to scale. So 30 to 50 years sounds like a long time, but to put together the electric grid, even in the United States, we don't have the wires to get the electricity from the wind farms to the locations where we need it. And so just this is the example that an electrical engineering professor told me. I haven't confirmed it, but I'm going to repeat it anyways. He said, in my town that I work in Butte, Montana, it's an intersection of two major interstates, Interstate 15 and Interstate 90. So there's a huge truck stop there because trucks are hauling goods across the country. And he said, if all those trucks that fuel up with diesel fuel now had to switch to electricity, we'd need 3 times more electric generation in Butte than what the city is today. So if the city is using so many megawatts of electricity, we need 4 times that to power the trucks that come through and get fueled up by diesel fuel today. So that, I'm not saying that's impossible, like that's our goal, but that takes a long time for that to happen. So the transition, I think, is much longer than people are
willing to do.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Professor.
Okay, so anybody else has a question? Okay, since there is no one has question, I have a question for you, Dr. Hoffman.
Yes.
I have one question regarding the Denbury project for CO2. So how much the percentage that the CO2 will be produced back after they inject it? I mean, for storage. If you have
Yep. So as they're producing the oil and gas, they are producing back some CO2. It breaks through from the injection well to the production well, and they produce it back. They capture that and they re-inject it. So they're re-injecting the CO2 all the time. So interesting, like the Bell Creek project I know the most about. So there's actually 7 regions of that field, and they started in region 1 and they started injecting, and then as soon as it started getting breakthrough, then they had excess CO2 because the pipeline was providing more. So then they started injecting into region 2. So they've been doing it, I think somewhere 7, 8, maybe 10 years, but just under 10 years. And they're in the final region now. they're flooding that final region. So once they're done and they have, cycled all the CO2 and they don't think they can get any more oil out, then they'll just pressure up with CO2 at the end, and then they'll close all the wells and it'll be done. So that CO2 will be stored in there at the end. But during the process, some of that CO2 is going to come back out. But we're not just venting it, we're capturing it and we're putting it back down.
Okay, so sorry, Dr. Hoffman, I mean, the percentage, if you like, the percentage of the produced back to the injected volume. Do you have like any idea about the percentage?
I worked on a project in Wyoming, and so I'm trying to remember what the produced back volume. I think once I can't remember what it is. I don't know. It's a big percentage. I don't remember if it's 40% or 60% or 80%, but it's a lot. So like once you start producing gas, you don't need, we're bringing in a BCF of gas a day in the pipeline. We don't need very much of that anymore, right? So that's why we can divert that gas to a new location. And basically that's what they've done here. They went from Bell Creek up to Cedar Creek because they don't need much CO2 anymore at Bell Creek because they're producing so much and they're cycling so much. So that, again, that takes energy, takes processes to capture the gas, compress it, put it back in the ground. But
okay, right. The second question, for the what's the difference between this CO2 storage between conventional and unconventional? Regarding the unconventional reservoir, do they have much absorption rate for the CO2 as compared to the conventional, or there is no difference? Or for this?
No, so I think in conventional there may be more of these like absorption opportunities because of we have more organic molecules in unconventional reservoirs. In the conventional, I think originally it's mostly just stored in the supercritical phase, because the way CO2 works at high pressures, it basically forms kind of a pseudo liquid. But the idea is that long term, over tens of years, maybe hundreds of years, that CO2 will bind with the water and form carbonate and basically become a solid again. Or maybe we need to inject some chemicals into the reservoir for that to happen as well. So, but in unconventional reservoir, there's already some absorption mechanisms already there because of the organic material that the CO2 will bind onto. Same in coal seams. You can inject CO2 to store in coal seams, and it will transfer with the methane molecules in coal and store in the solid phase. But there's much fewer coal seam opportunities than there are hydrocarbon oil opportunities. So, anyways,
okay, so I just have one more question. Why you don't, also why you are not optimistic about the hydrogen storage?
I don't know. Hydrogen seems to have lots of problems. It's a very small molecule, so it's hard to store, hard to run in our current pipelines because it can leak out. Have you heard of the Hindenburg? It was a big blimp that blew up. So there's the Hindenburg effect that like hydrogen can explode very easily. Again, I may be wrong, but and there's currently a big investment in the United States into hydrogen. And so other people smarter than me have basically decided hydrogen is going to be it. And that most of those projects are taking methane, extracting the H's, taking the C's, right, and combining them with oxygen and doing a storage project. So they're basically taking methane, converting it to hydrogen, storing the CO2. So it's the same kind of thing where you have this point source. You have a place where you can get a lot of CO2 and put it in the ground. That is energy intensive. It's much better. So in my home, right, my hot water heater, I went and took a shower this morning. I had hot water, right? Just like that's part of the quality of life that I have that my grandparents didn't have, my great-grandparents 150 years ago. That's fired by natural gas. So, and my cook stove and my heat, it's all generated by like I have natural gas pipeline that comes to my house, burns the natural gas, makes my quality of life well. I'm not sure we can do that with hydrogen because of the leakage issue and the explosive issue. But again, I may be wrong. Maybe 10 years from now, I'll have hydrogen, natural gas fired.
Yeah, actually, I can see right now in the Middle East, most of the research projects is going towards hydrogen storage. There are
Interesting.
too much fun for that. Yeah, that's why I asked you about why you are not optimistic about the hydrogen.
So, yeah,
Sorry.
I'm not optimistic, but that's that's just right. I'm one person, so.
No, it's okay.
I see Abdul also has a question.
Yes, Abdul. Yeah,
Oh,
go ahead.
Sultan.
Abdul Sultan, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for allowing me. My name is Abdurrahman Al Sultan. I'm also an alumni from Montana Tech from 2019. It's nice to hear from you, Dr. Hoffman, and also it's nice to hear some of the familiar voices like Khalid Abbasi.
Yeah.
So one of the questions I have in mind is the level of complexity between utilizing CO2 as a CCUS or an EOR. Like, what's the level of complexity? Like, why do we not invest more into using CO2 in EOR, since it's going to give us back some, like, more money? It's going to be more profitable than CCUS, than just storing it. I know we're exploring like thermal energy and all this, utilizing CCUS, but still, why do we not invest in EOR? Is it that complex? That's why we're heading towards CCUS?
That's a great question. I think it's just what you hear in the media or from publications is that you hear a lot about carbon underground storage, but in my opinion, more CO2 is being stored in EOR projects. That's where the funding is going. That's where there's a project that likely is happening in northern Montana, additional, completely separate from the Denbury, where they're going to take CO2 from a plant and use it for EOR in an old oil field. And there's some places in Texas where I know that's happening, and in Louisiana, actually. So I hear about these EOR projects. I think the economics of those are much better, but you don't hear much about them. Even the company that I mentioned that's doing something in Montana or thinking about doing something in Montana, they're quiet about it. They're not standing on the rooftop shouting. They're saying like, we're doing this, we're trying to get funding for it. But, they're where the projects that are doing CO2 storage, they are standing on the rooftop shouting, we're doing storage, we're doing such a great thing here. So I think it might be just perception. Actually, it should be, I don't know if it's just as simple, but it should be almost as simple to do CO2 EOR. Our industry has been doing it for 60 years. We understand it really well. And so, but I mean, I don't know, the storage component I guess it's a little bit easier because you don't have to produce anything back. You just push it in there and just close up your wells and wait. But
yeah,
it
makes more sense. It makes more sense to make money off of EOR, and it's still like I consider EOR as a CCUS. So EOR can be a CCUS, but CCUS cannot be EOR. So that's what makes me wonder. That's the only thing.
No, I think you're right. It's just you don't hear as much about it. It's probably.
I think let me, Dr. Hoffman, if I can explain it very well.
Oh, did I freeze up or did?
No,
I think he did.
Okay.
But in regards to CO2 injection as an EOR in Kuwait, at least, I could say that we're at like the very, very early stages. Like we've started, but we haven't gone past through the pilot stage, and it's still not.
What kind of CO2 source do you have? Where's your CO2 coming from for these projects?
I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure about that part, but they've been testing it in a bunch of pilot programs, but they haven't gone forward yet due to economical costs.
Yeah. Yeah. And there may be some incentives, worldwide incentive. Even in the US, there's some economic incentives to do CO2 EOR. You get a little bit of tax credit basically for doing, you get more tax credit for doing a carbon storage project, but you get some for doing the EOR. So if there happens to be a world carbon tax or something like that, that would benefit CO2 EOR, I think.
Yeah, I'm curious to know where Saudi is at right now in regards to CO2 ER. If you can comment on this, Sultan.
Well, the whole Middle East is dominated by conventional reservoirs. We have conventional reservoirs. That's the reason why we're not even thinking or implementing this.
Exactly.
And it's the same case like Ahmed said at the beginning. We have conventional reservoirs in the Middle East. So that's the reason. And I could say that we're in the same stage. We're trying to plan on implementing it in the near future. And we're going to utilize the plants, the huge plants that have big CO2 emissions with them, along with them, to utilize them for CCUS projects.
And I just remembered where we're going to get our CO2 from. It's from our refineries.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Ahmed.
Yeah, thank you, Ahmed, and thank you, Professor Hoffman, as well.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
Any other
His name is
question, guys?
Ahmed, but it's really... Well, thank you guys very much. I really appreciate the time. The conversation was really fun.
Okay, Dr. Hoffman, you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I will send you my slides, and if you want to distribute them, you can. Has my contact information, so if anybody wants to reach out.
We appreciate it. Okay, guys, let me close this session. We highly appreciate your time, Dr. Hoffman. It was like very outstanding. And we learned too much from it. And we can see you in person next time, so we can enjoy your thoughts and we can learn much more than that. Thank you guys for your attendance, and we appreciate your comments. Dr. Hoffman, thank you so much for.
It was really my pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, guys.
And have a nice day. Bye.